Chaim. Bracha.
Chaim.
Rabbi Chitrik met Rebbetzin Chana, the mother of the Rebbe's mother. He originally met her in Paris, and later when she came to New York, he would often go to her house to visit her. She was older and she was alone, and he would go speak to her, keep her company. Yes, the Rebbe would visit her every day, that's true.
So why
But
just
the Rebbe
she was
wanted
alone?
other people to visit her also, to keep her company. So Rabbi Chitrik would go every day, or I'm not sure every day, but pretty often. He would go visit her. He was able to speak Russian. They would speak together. And he, as Ari pointed out, the Rebbe would also go visit her every day. So Rabbi Chitrik tried to time his visits that it should be after the Rebbe would leave. However, sometimes he arrived and the Rebbe was still there. And he noticed something very interesting. The Rebbe usually welcomed him in, thanked him for spending time with his mother. And then the Rebbe would leave. But he noticed that whenever the Rebbe would leave, as he was leaving, he would stop to straighten something out. Usually he would find a chair that wasn't so straight, he would straighten it out. Or sometimes you'd find a painting on the wall that was a little crooked, he would straighten it out. And the first time it happened, Rabbi Chitrik thought, it's maybe the Rebbe noticed the chair was crooked, so he straightened it out. But this happened the second time, a third time, and this happens every single time. So after the third time, he was looking he had a puzzled look on his face. And the Rebbe's mother noticed that he had a puzzled look on his face. And she says, I could explain it to you, but I need you to promise not to tell anybody, not to tell this over. So at least...
How do we know?
We're in the middle of the story. Not to tell the story over during my lifetime. So he agreed, and she says, many people don't. She said, I saw you were looking at my son as he was leaving the room, and you're probably wondering what's going on, so I'll explain it to you, she said. She said, from the day that my son turned bar mitzvah, from the day when my son turned 13, I never saw his back. Whenever he leaves me, he always walks out backwards or sideways. Right? When you walk away from the Aron HaKodesh, you're not supposed to turn your back on the Aron HaKodesh. So whenever the Rebbe left his mother's presence, he would always walk out either backwards or sideways, and but he doesn't want me to notice, the Rebbetzin said. He doesn't want me to notice this. So he always finds something, he straightens out some chairs, or he has to clean something on the wall or something, and he walks out sideways instead of turning his back to me. Right? Now we're talking about the Rebbe, the leader, thousands, tens of thousands of Hasidim. But when he was in his mother's presence, he was so careful never to turn his back on his mother. Right? When there were times during the Farbrengen when suddenly the Rebbe would stand up, lift himself up in his chair, and people around didn't understand why is the Rebbe suddenly standing up or lifting himself up. And later they found out that the Rebbe's mother had walked into the women's section. You couldn't really see because there was tinted glass in the front. But the Rebbe sensed that his mother was there, he would stand up. The mitzvah of honoring one's parents, right, of honoring one's mother, one's father, applies no matter how great you are. You could be the greatest leader, the greatest Rebbe. You find Rav Tarfon, one of the leading rabbis of the generation, right? When his mother's shoe broke, he put his hands under his mother's on the ground so his mother could walk on his hands. She doesn't have to step on the ground.
Who was that
right?
rabbi that did it?
Rav Tarfon.
Rabbi Tarfon?
Rabbi Tarfon, yes. The pasuk in Melachim Aleph, Eric Beis pasuk Yotes tells us that when Bathsheba went to visit Shlomo HaMelech, so immediately Shlomo, who was the king, he stood up and he ordered a throne, a chair to be brought next to him for his mother, and only after his mother was sitting did he finally sit down. Right? So you could be a great king and everybody has to honor you. But you still have a mitzvah of honoring and respecting your parents.
They're the real kings and queens.
They're your king and they're your queen, yes. So based on this, it seems a little bit strange that in this week's Parsha we find a few times that Yaakov, for some reason, stands up, bows down to his son, to Yosef HaTzadik, who is the king. Right? Now we find this twice in this week's Parsha. The first time where we find it is when Yaakov calls Yosef to ask him, Yaakov asked Yosef to bury him in Eretz Yisrael. So it says that after Yosef agreed and Yosef swore that he would bury Yaakov in Eretz Yisrael, so it says that Yaakov bowed down to towards the head of his bed. And Rashi has the question right away. Why is Yaakov bowing down to Yosef? And Rashi gives two different explanations. The first explanation is that Yaakov just asked Yosef to do him a favor. And when someone does you a favor, when you need somebody to do you a favor, you need to show them respect. That's just how it is, right? Even if you might be the greatest person in the world, but if you're asking someone for a favor, right, and that person might be the lowliest person in the world, but you have to show them a certain, you should respect everybody, but when you're asking somebody for a favor, you have to make sure that you ask it in a respectful manner, and you have to show respect for the person. That's the first answer Rashi gives. And then Rashi gives a second answer. He says that our Chachamim learn from here that the Shechina always rests over the head of a sick person. And when Yaakov was bowing down, he wasn't bowing down to Yosef, he was bowing down to Hashem. Of course, it looked as if he was bowing down to Yosef because he had to show respect to Yosef who was doing him a favor, but in essence, he was bowing down to Hashem. Okay, so we have two different explanations of why Yaakov bowed down to Yosef. But then the Torah continues, and it tells us that a while later, Yosef was told that his father Yaakov was very ill. So Yosef came to visit his father. He took his two sons because he wanted to get blessings from his father. So he comes into Yaakov, and Yaakov hears that Yosef is coming. Vayischazek Yisrael, Vayeshev Alamita. Yaakov was very sick. He was weak. And he strengthened himself, the Torah said, and he sat up. Instead of laying down, he sat up on the bed. Right? This is very strange. Why is Yaakov suddenly sitting up when Yosef comes? And this is actually, earlier we said that Yaakov was asking Yosef a favor. But here, Yosef is coming to ask Yaakov the favor. Right? So why is Yaakov strengthening himself, putting in an extra effort to sit up on the bed? So over here we have a disagreement between Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi says that we learn from here that it's a mitzvah to show respect for a king. It's a mitzvah to show respect for a king, right? Even though Yosef was his son, and Yosef had to respect him, but Yaakov also had to show some respect for his son who was a king. But this is a bit of a strange answer, because if this is the case, Yaakov, we don't find earlier when Yaakov met Yosef many times already. We don't find this, that Yaakov showed respect for Yosef all the time. Even previously, when Yaakov did show respect for Yosef, we were given a reason, or actually gives a reason why he had to show respect, why he had to bow. So why suddenly does Yaakov show respect for his son Yosef? So the Das Keinem Ebali Tosfos gives a different explanation. He gives a different explanation. Why did Yaakov strengthen himself to sit up when Yosef was coming? So he says, we find in the Gemara, in Bava Metzia, Daf Pei Zayin, the Gemara tells us that, and this is also brought down in the Medrash, it's also Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer who discusses it, and we're taught that for the first, 2,500 years of the existence of the world, when it was time for a person to pass away, we know that Hashem gave Adam Rishon and Shama, and he blew it through his nostrils. So when it was time for a person to pass away, the person would sneeze, and his neshama would leave his nostrils, and he would pass away.
As soon as you sneeze once, right?
That's what it seems like. A person would sneeze, and they would pass away. And Yaakov, and this went on for 2,500 years, until Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu came along, and he said, Hashem, it's not right. A person is walking around in the street, he's nice and healthy, and suddenly he sneezes, and his life is over. He has no time to prepare himself. He has no time to get his affairs in order, to bless his children, to say goodbye to his friends and family. And Yaakov asked Hashem that before a person passes away, Hashem should make the person become weak and sick. And he should know that his time is going to come soon, to have to leave this world. And Hashem said, I accept your prayer, and you will be the first one to become weak and sick before you die. So Yaakov was the first person in history to become sick before he passed away. There were other types of sicknesses, but this wasn't sicknesses related to death, someone who passes away. Right? There were people who would get sick, they wouldn't be feeling good, you'd have a cold or whatever. But the person becoming weak and sick before they passed away, Yaakov was the first one. And therefore, since he was the first one, this was Chaim Bracha. So this was a new concept, and people were not so familiar with it. And obviously, the doctors at the time did not understand what this meant, that Yaakov suddenly became weak and sick. And people did not know what this meant, right? They didn't understand what type of sickness was this. Was Yaakov, suddenly Yaakov's laying down on a bed. It's hard for him to get up. And they weren't sure. Maybe the sickness affected his mind as well. Maybe maybe he's not of sound mind. And Yaakov's about to bless his children, and he wanted people to take his blessing seriously, right? He wanted everybody to take his words seriously. So he wanted to show that he's of sound mind. And that's why, says the Das Kenim Baliyat Tosfos, in order to show everyone that he is aware of what's going on around him, he understands what he's doing. Therefore, Yaakov strengthened himself. He put in an extra effort, and he sat up on his bed. This is the reason. But there's an obvious question, right? If Yaakov was giving instructions to his children, right, then I can understand. Yaakov's giving instructions to his children. He wants them to take his instructions seriously. So he has to show everybody that he's of sound mind, that he knows what's going on around him. But over here, right, Yaakov is about to bless his children, right? He's about to bless Yosef. He's about to bless Menashe and Ephraim. That's the main reason that Yosef is coming to him, that he should be able to bless his children. So the question is, why does everybody need to know that he's of sound mind before he blesses his children? Right? What if they don't take his blessing seriously? I mean, what difference does it make if they take the blessing seriously? Right? The instructions we could understand. But the blessings, why is it so important? Right? The words of a tzaddik have power even if you don't take it seriously. Right? We know that Yaakov mentioned, right, with that the one who stole Lavan's idols should die. And even though he didn't mean it, he didn't know who he was referring to. His words have power, right? So why is it so important that everybody take the blessing seriously? So Baruch was a innkeeper in about 200 years ago. And he leased the inn from the local pirates, from the local landowner, and he had to pay up every month. He had to pay a certain rent to the pirates, and he was having a very difficult time paying his rent. Right, as it goes in all the stories, it's a very cold winter. There's a lot of snow. There's not a lot of travelers. And Baruch comes to the pirates and he's like, I'm really sorry, but I don't have any money to pay. Okay, fine. You'll pay extra next month. Another month goes by. Another month goes by. Finally, a year goes by, and the pirates is furious. It's been a whole year, and you haven't paid me the rent. That's it. I'm giving you 30 days to pay your rent. If you don't pay your rent within 30 days, you're going to be thrown into prison. Yes, all of it.
Wow.
You're going to get thrown. You and your family are going to be arrested, and you're going to be thrown into the dungeon. What does Baruch do? What does he do? He comes home, he tells his wife Rivka what happened. And Rivka says, you have to go to the Rebbe, you have to go to Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin, ask him for a bracha. And he says, Ruzhin's so far away, I only have a month to get the money together. I want to spend all the time trying to put the money together. I don't have time to spend a week and a half traveling to Ruzhin, another week and a half traveling back. So she says, you know what, okay, I'll go to Ruzhin, and I'll ask the Rebbe for a bracha. Okay, wonderful. So Rivka sets off. She takes some food for the road, and she sets off to Ruzhin. She travels for over a week, and she arrives in a little village next to Ruzhin. And over there, her friend Sarah lives in this little village, so she decided to visit her friend Sarah. She comes to Sarah's house, and Sarah comes to the door, and sees her friend Rivka. But Rivka noticed that Sarah looked very, very sad. And she said to Sarah, what's going on? Everything okay? Sarah says, no. My husband, Chaim, is very, very sick. And the doctors don't know what to do. And this situation is getting worse and worse. So Rivka says to her friend Sarah, she says, I'm traveling to Ruzhin. Ask the Rebbe for a bracha. And you live pretty close to Ruzhin. You're only a day away. Why don't you come with me? We'll go to the Rebbe and we'll ask the Rebbe for a bracha together. Okay, a good idea. She has to find somebody to look after her husband while she's traveling to Ruzhin. They go to Ruzhin together, and they want to see the Rebbe. But they come to the Rebbe's office, and the Rebbe's secretary says, I'm sorry, but right now the Rebbe is not accepting people. Right? It was, I think, during Elul or something. It was a time when the Rebbe wasn't accepting people for yechidus, for personal audiences. You have to come back in a few weeks. They say, well, it's urgent. We only have 30 days to pay the rent, and her husband's sick, and we need to get a blessing from the Rebbe right away. So the secretary says, okay, if that's the case, you could write a letter, write down your request on a letter, and I'll bring it into the Rebbe, and he'll write you back an answer. Okay. So Rivka and Sarah sit down. Rivka describes her problem. They need to get the rent. Their time is almost up. Their whole family is going to be thrown into prison. And Sarah describes her problem, that her husband's very sick. And they send in the letters to the Rebbe. The Rebbe gets the first letter about Baruch and Rivka who can't pay the rent. And the Rebbe writes down an answer. He says you have to trust in Hashem, and Hashem will help you. Okay. He gets the second letter where, Chaim is very sick. And the Rebbe says you should call a doctor. You should call a blood letter, and you should have him apply bankes to the wound. You should have him apply bankes to the wounds. Now, bankes is a type of medicine that has gone out of fashion. It's not used anymore. It's not leeches, no. It's similar to leeches. It's a way that they used to remove blood from a person. It was bankes are a type of glass cups that they would use to remove blood from a person. What they would do is they would heat the cup up, make it very hot. They would make a cut on the person's arm. They would put the cup on, and as the cup would cool down, the ear inside would contract. It would create suction, and it would suck out blood from the person's body. And there were different types of bankes. Some bankes were actually done without making a cut. It would just make like a bruise instead of actually removing blood. And the Rebbe suggested that since he's very sick, they should bring a doctor to apply bankes. Okay, so the Rebbe gives the two letters to his secretary. The secretary is in a big rush. He grabs the two letters, and as he's walking out, he mixes the two letters up. He mixes up the two letters, right? So Chaim and so Sarah, who's here for her husband's very sick, she gets a letter from the Rebbe that she has to trust in Hashem, and Hashem's going to make everything's going to be okay. And Rivka, who needs money to pay her rent, gets a letter from the Rebbe that she should get an expert doctor and she should apply bankes to her husband. Okay, this is a very strange advice, but if it comes from the Rebbe, there must be a reason for it. So she rushes home, and she comes back, and she tells Baruch, we're going to call a doctor. The Rebbe said you have to apply bankes. Baruch says, are you crazy? I'm not sick. I have no medical issues. I'm not applying any bankes. And so the Rebbe said, and he says, listen, there must have been a mistake. I'm not doing this. Okay, fine. Another few days go by. Baruch's running around trying to put together the money. And he can't get any money together, right? He gets a couple of rubles here and there, but he's not getting close to the money that he owes. And finally, it's the day before the deadline, and Baruch is desperate. He's crying, what am I going to do? Tomorrow, the Parshas is going to send his soldiers to arrest us, to arrest the whole family, throw us in the dungeon. And Rivka says, listen, you know what the Rebbe said? The Rebbe said he got to apply bankes. And he says, but it makes no sense. And she says, listen, you don't have any other choice. Okay, fine. They call the doctor. The doctor comes and he says, where's the wound? And there's no wound, but the Rebbe said you should apply bankes. Okay, where should we put the bankes? I don't know, the Rebbe didn't say. Maybe cover his whole body with bankes. Right? We're going to take blood from the whole body. He says, what type of bankas? There are different types. We said there's types that cause bruises, types that draw blood. We don't know. Do it all the types, right? All your bankas you have, bring here. We're going to do it. Okay, fine. So Baruch lays down in the bed, and the doctor comes. He spends 2 hours making cuts and putting the cups on, sucking blood out, making all different types of marks on the skin, right? Pretty soon his whole body's red and dripping with blood, and the doctor goes home. And as the doctor leaves, there's a loud banging on the door. The Parshas guard, the Parshas soldier is there at the door. I'm here to bring Baruch to the Parshas. He has to pay up. It's the deadline. His rent is due. And Rivka says, I'm sorry, but Baruch can't come. Look at him. He's lying in bed. He's he's not in a state to go to the Parshas. So the guard says, okay, fine. He goes back to the Parshas. He says, listen, Baruch is not feeling very good. He can't come to you. And the Parshas is like, excuses. That Jew is looking for excuses. He's making believe like he's sick. He calls 4 of his toughest soldiers. He says, I want you to go there, and I want you to make sure Baruch comes back. Okay, they go to Baruch's house. They come inside, and they're like, we're bringing you to the Parshas. And Baruch's like, I can't go. I'm stuck in my bed. I can't get up. Right? So they say, okay, that's not a problem. We'll take your bed. They 4 guards grab the 4 legs of his bed. They lift it up to their shoulders, and they schlep Baruch out into the streets. And they come to the Parshas' palace. And as they're coming in, the Parshas' wife is walking in front of the house, and she sees this poor soldier schlepping this bed with this guy who's covered in blood. His whole body looks bruised. And she rushes over and she says, Baruch, is everything okay? What happened? I just saw you yesterday in the marketplace. You look fine. What happened to you? And Baruch thinks quick, and he knows that his life is in danger over here. If his family's thrown into prison, who knows if they're going to survive? He has to come up with a good story. So he says, let me tell you what happened. It's a terrible story. He says, let me tell you what happened. And the soldiers put him down, and he starts coming up with the story. He tells her, listen, what happened was there's a deadline. I have to pay rent to your husband. I didn't have the money. So I decided I have to go find someone who can lend me the money. So I traveled to the next town where I have some friends, and I managed to borrow the money to pay the rent. And it was already, by the time I managed to put the money together, it was already late at night. And I considered maybe I should stay there for the night, but I knew I had to pay the rent in the morning. I didn't want to be late. So I decided to return, even though it's late at night, to go through the forest the middle of the night to make sure to pay the rent early in the morning to your husband. And sure enough, as I'm walking through the forest, I was attacked by a group of bandits. And they say, hand over the money. And I say, absolutely not. I need this money to pay the Parshas. This is very important. I cannot give you the money. And they said, if you don't give us the money, we're going to beat you up. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm not giving you the money. So they picked up their sticks. They started beating me. They started punching me, hitting me, and I refused to give them the money. Finally, they beat me up. They knocked me down on the floor, and they grabbed the money, and they ran off. And I barely managed to get home. Parshas' wife feels so bad for him. She says, "Oy, Baruch, that's terrible. You were just trying to pay your rent, and look what happened to you. I'm going to go talk to my husband. Don't worry, I'm going to straighten this whole thing out." She goes running to her husband. She says, "Look what happened. Baruch's trying to pay the rent. He got beaten up, and he didn't want to, look at him." And the Parshas feels so bad. He's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Baruch. Listen, I forgive all the money you can, I'm going to release you from the money that you owe. And not only that, the next year you can live in the inn rent-free." Okay, wonderful, right? He comes home. It takes a few weeks till he recovers. And as soon as he recovers, he immediately travels to Ruzhin to thank the Rebbe. Such a special bracha he got from the Rebbe, an open miracle, right? He comes to the Rebbe, and he comes to the Rebbe's tish, and he starts telling over the story to all the Hasidim, and he says to the Rebbe, "Mamish, an open miracle the Rebbe did. Thank you so much." The Rebbe says, "What are you talking about? I didn't do the miracle." So what do you mean? The Rebbe says, "I never told you to apply bankers. I told Chaim to apply bankers, right? I never told you, I never told your wife, I never told you to apply bankers. I didn't do this miracle." So he says, "Rebbe, so how did the miracle happen?" So the Rebbe said, the miracle happened because of your emunah, because of your bitachon, because of your faith and trust in the blessing of a tzaddik. the faith and the trust that a person has in the blessing of a tzaddik itself might sometimes be even more powerful, right, than the blessing itself. And this says Rav Simcha Zissel, the Shiva of Hebron Yeshiva, he says this is why Yaakov was so careful, made such an effort to sit up before he blessed his grandchildren. He said, I know that this blessing is not a one-time blessing. This blessing is going to be written down in the Torah for all future generations. As a matter of fact, every father is going to use this blessing to bless his children. And I want everyone to know the power of this blessing. And the power of this blessing is when we believe in the blessing. When we know that this blessing was given by Yaakov Avinu, and Yaakov therefore sat up to show that he's of sound mind, that this blessing is a serious blessing and should be taken seriously by every one of us. And this is also why half of this week's Parsha is blessings. Right? The Torah is supposed to be a book of laws, of lessons. Half this week's Parsha is Yaakov's blessing his children, his grandchildren. Each one of the 12 Shvatim gets his own blessing. Why do we need to know these blessings? What mitzvahs, what lessons are there from these blessings? Right? What's the point of us knowing these blessings? Says Rav Simcha Zissel, the Torah is telling us there's an amazing power over here. The reason why these were written into the Torah is because Yaakov and Hashem, who wrote the Torah, wanted each and every one of us to be able to tap into these blessings. Right? Wherever we are in our life, whenever we feel like we need a blessing, we open up the Torah and we look at the blessings that are written down in the Torah. These are not temporary blessings, one-time things. They're not one-time events. These are blessings that are eternal. They're written in the Torah. Right? And what do I need to do in order to tap into the blessing? I need to read the blessing and I need to believe in the blessing. And if I believe in the blessing, that itself, the very fact that I believe and I trust in the blessing, and I live my life as if my life is full of blessings, then that itself will bring blessings and allow me to tap into the power of these blessings. And to conclude with a final story, Yehuda ben Shoshan was born in Morocco at the mid-70s. I think after the Yom Kippur War, he traveled to Eretz Yisrael, to Israel. Most of the Moroccan Jewry kind of left at that time. And at a young age, when he was still in Morocco, he became close to Chabad, or Michal Lipsker, was sent by the Rebbe to the Jews in Morocco, was Shliach. And when he got married, so Baruch Hashem, he was very happy with his wife, but 10 years passed by and they didn't have any children, right? They didn't have any children. After 10 years, he was traveling on business. He was a tobacco merchant and he was traveling to Paris. And he met a friend of his who told him that he just had that he also didn't have children, his friend, and he got a bracha from the Rebbe and he had a child, he had a son. So, okay, so when So when Yehuda heard this, he immediately wrote a letter to the Rebbe, and he got a bracha from the Rebbe, and within a year, they had a son. They had a daughter. They named her Mazal Batya. Now, 6.5 years passed. 6.5 years passed, and one day, it was, I think, around Tu B'Shvat, his daughter came home from school with a bad headache. And he thought maybe, the class had gone on a trip for Tu B'Shvat. Maybe she wasn't feeling well, she'd go to rest. But the headache didn't go away. They went to the doctor, they gave her antibiotics. But the headache not only didn't go away, but it got progressively worse. So they started going to more serious doctors, they started doing tests. And finally, they got one of the tests came back, and the doctor told him that unfortunately, his daughter had a tumor, a malignant tumor, a cancerous tumor in her brain. A tumor is something that grows inside a person's body that's not supposed to be there. And So he asked the doctor, what can we do? Can we get rid of it? The doctor says, I don't know. It doesn't, the state that it's in right now, I don't know if there's anything you can do. Certainly there's nothing I can do over here. But maybe if you travel to America, maybe some doctors there might be able to help you. There's not a lot of hope. The tumor is so big right now, it's not, the chances aren't, you don't have very good chances, chas v'shalom. Okay, he immediately took his daughter and his wife and his daughter. They traveled to Boston, and they met with some of the best doctors in the field, and they did all different tests on his daughter, and they came back and they said, listen, we're not sure exactly how to deal with this. There's a disagreement amongst my doctors. There is an operation that we could do, but the operation is a very, very dangerous operation, and it has a very, very low chance of success. There's very low chances that this operation is going to succeed. And not only that, the operation itself is so dangerous. Who knows what could happen just from the operation itself. So we're not sure if it's worth it. And he said, well, if I don't do the operation, what's going to happen? And he said, if you don't do the operation, your daughter has 6 months to live. What do you do? He went, he turned to his wife, and his wife said, you got to go ask the Rebbe for a bracha. The Rebbe is the one who gave us the blessing to have our daughter. We're in Boston, we're not far away from New York. You have to travel to the Rebbe and ask the Rebbe for a bracha. Okay? So he takes a flight to New York. He gets an appointment with the Rebbe. And he comes into the Rebbe's office, and he's crying. Tears are running down his face. And the Rebbe looks at him, and the Rebbe says, it's the month of Adar, right? This was the beginning of the month of Adar. And Adar is the month of joy. Who gave you permission to bring sadness into my office? Who gave you permission to bring sadness into my office? So he was shocked at such an answer. Is the Rebbe making jokes with him? He says, Rebbe, my daughter's life is in danger. My daughter's life is in danger. So the Rebbe says, do you think that sadness is going to help your daughter? Right? It's a mitzvah to be happy in the month of Adar. So he says, Rebbe, I'm ready to be happy, but what do I do? Right? The doctors don't know what to do. There's an operation. The operation is very, very dangerous. Right? There's very low chances of success. There's very low chances of success. And what do I do, Rebbe? How can I be happy? How could you expect me to be happy in such a situation? So the Rebbe looks at him, and the Rebbe says Adar is the month of joy, and the reason why Adar is the month of joy is because Adar is the month of V'nahapechu, that everything was transformed from one extreme to the other. Everything was turned upside down, right? And if you're truly rejoiced with the month of Adar, so everything will be transformed, everything will be turned upside down, right? The Rebbe motioned with his hand from one side to the other. Okay, such an answer from the Rebbe. Fine. He leaves the Rebbe's office, and as he's leaving, the Rebbe says, "You should hear good news." Okay, so he said he doesn't even remember if he left the Rebbe's office or if the secretary pulled him out, but he found himself outside of the Rebbe's office, and suddenly remembers that he didn't get an answer. Right? He didn't get the answer to the question that he wanted, that he came to ask. Right? His question was whether you should do an operation or not. And he didn't seem to have gotten an answer. So he went to the secretary. He said, can I go back in? And the secretary says, no, you can't go back into the Rebbe. You don't go back into the Rebbe. You don't go back into the Rebbe. But if you want, you could write to the Rebbe. Okay, so you wrote to the Rebbe, thanks for the bracha, but what should I do about the operation? And he gets a note back from the Rebbe. The Rebbe says, I already answered you. Right? The Rebbe says, I already answered you. I already answered you yesterday in the Yechidus that we had yesterday. So he says to the Rebbe secretary, I don't know what's going on. The Rebbe said that everything is going to be transformed. Is that an answer about whether we need to do an operation or not? I don't know. And the secretary says, listen, I don't know. I wasn't there when he spoke with the Rebbe, but, perhaps that's the answer. And he says, but I need a clearer answer. I need a clear answer, right? If you would have been a chassid, right? If you would have been a real chassid, then that's a pretty clear answer. For me, that sounds like a clear enough answer. But
to do it?
What?
Not to do it?
Not to do the operation, right? But for Yehuda, he felt that he needed a clearer answer. So he again wrote down another letter and he said, Rebbe, I need a answer that's a little clearer than that. Should we do the operation or not? So they sent the letter back into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe wrote back. That if you insist on asking, then I advise you to consult with another doctor, someone you're familiar with, and follow his advice. So he says to the secretary, what does that mean, if you insist on asking? So the secretary says, apparently you weren't supposed to ask, but once you asked, this is the answer you got. Okay, so he consulted with a doctor, with a friend of his who was a doctor, and he was advised to do the operation. Yes, so they prepared for the operation. It was the day after Purim, 2 days after Purim. They came to the hospital to do the operation. It was supposed to be a 7-hour operation, and 45 minutes go by. And suddenly the doctors come out and they call him and his wife in, and they're holding papers, they're holding test results, and they say, we don't understand. There's no tumor. There's nothing there. We don't understand what happened. And he says, well, I understand what happened, right? I got a bracha from the Rebbe. Okay, wonderful. I guess close her up and well, I guess I can take my daughter home. They said, no, it's going to take some time. We put her under anesthesia. We opened her up. It's going to take a recovery period, right? So fine. So they waited. They waited a day. And after a day, their daughter still hasn't woken up. And they go to the doctor, is everything okay? And the doctor said, we don't know. She hasn't woken up, right? Obviously, there was no tumor there, but we opened her up. We started doing a whole operation on her, and she hasn't recovered yet. She hasn't woken up yet. So he realizes that he kind of made a mistake doing this operation. So he immediately went back to New York, and he got another appointment with the Rebbe. And he didn't get an appointment. He wrote a letter to the Rebbe, and he got an answer. The Rebbe wrote that I'm gonna daven for her by the oil, by my father-in-law's gravesite, and you should hear good news. She should have a refuah shalema. And shortly afterwards, she opened up her eyes, and she started recovering. But the doctor said it would take a few weeks, so it would take some time before she's back to normal after this operation. So they're going to spend a few weeks. They figured they'll spend Pesach in New York, and he had relatives who lived in Flatbush, so they stayed there for Pesach. But the last day of Pesach, he knew that in Chabad, we have on the last day of Pesach, we make a special Seudah, a special feast for Mashiach. So he decided to go to Crown Heights to go for Seudas Mashiach with the Rebbe. So he comes to the Farbrengen, and he said he didn't really understand most of what the Rebbe was saying, but towards the end of the Farbrengen, he went close to the Rebbe to say L'chaim, and the Rebbe called him over. The Rebbe motioned for him to come over, and the Rebbe took out 2 pieces of matzah. And the Rebbe gave him 2 pieces of matzah. And the Rebbe said to him, matzah, according to Kabbalah, matzah, it has 2 names. It's called michla de mehemenusa and michla da svasa, which means food of emunah, food of faith, and food of healing, food of refuah. So I'm giving you 2 pieces of matzah for the 2 meanings of matzah. The matzah, which is for refuah, which is for healing, should be for your daughter, that she should be completely healed, completely cured. And the matzah that's for faith is for you, so that your daughter shouldn't have to suffer because of your lack of emunah. he wasn't embarrassed. There was nobody around heard. He was next to the Rebbe. This is the message that he got, right? So we have to realize that unfortunately, we don't have a personal ability to personally go into the Rebbe and get a bracha from him. Yes, she recovered. She has now. I mean, at least when he wrote down the story, she said she's married with 3 children. Baruch Hashem.
What happened? Did he give the matzah? What happened with the matzah? What did he do with it?
He took 1 matzah for himself and 1 matzah for his daughter, as the Rebbe told him.
She ate it while she was within the room.
She was already conscious. She was already recovering. She had a hard, difficult time talking. He said it was in the recovery period already. So unfortunately today we don't have the ability to go into the Rebbe and get a bracha. But we have so many brachas. We open up the Torah, right? The Torah is full of brachas. We have the brachas that Hashem gave Avraham Avinu. We have the brachas that Hashem gave Yitzchak. We have the brachas that Yitzchak gave Yaakov his son. We have the brachas that Hashem gave Yaakov. We have the brachas that Yaakov gave all of his children. Half of this week's Parshas is full of blessings. We have the blessings of Moshe Rabbeinu giving the Jewish people, the blessings of the Kohanim, right? These aren't written in the Torah that we should know blessings that were given 3,000 years ago. They're blessings for each and every one of us right now. And we have to realize, how do we tap into the blessings, right? There are so many blessings we have. Right? There are so many times in our life when we wish we can get a blessing. And we could get a blessing. We open up a Torah, right? We open up Parshas Vayechi and we have half a Parsha full of blessings. But how do we tap into those blessings? We have to realize that the believing in the blessing and recognizing and living our life as if we know that these blessings are for us, right? That allows us to tap into the power of those blessings and allows us to fill our entire lives with blessings. So whenever we're facing a challenge, whether it's a personal challenge, whether it's a challenge in our family, whether it's a challenge that the entire Jewish nation is facing right now, we have to realize that we have a whole Torah full of blessings, right? A whole list of blessings for every situation that we find ourselves in. All we have to do is tap into the power of the blessing by truly believing that we are blessed. Chaim, Chaim.